Hey everybody, Christian from Treasure Town here, and today we're going to be discussing the full evolution of the $1 bill. So basically, ever since 1862, the United States has been printing its own currency, and the $1 bill definitely could be the most iconic of these, and the form of the $1 bill has changed enormously over the year. There's 22 different switches and varieties that we're going to be talking about today in terms of the main ones that have been made. There's definitely more specific differences, but 22 is quite a lot, and we're not going to spend too much time on them, but I'm going to stop and talk a little bit about at least each one of them. So with that being said, let's just start with the 1862 $1 bill. This one was the original one, and it features Salmon P. Chase. So who is that? He was the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury under Lincoln, and he was during the Civil War. So the reason that the government actually started making it is before they were often issued regionally by banks, but instead, in the times of the Civil War, the government needed to have its own currency system. So this is what we see here. The value on these is $150 to $1,500 or more. The upper range is definitely not the most that they can sell for, but the lower range is generally what you're going to pay for a pretty damaged note. And interestingly, the $1 bills are not overly expensive. In 1869, we see George Washington make his way onto the $1 bill, though he would not stay there permanently until much later. This one's actually a little bit more valuable. It's $250 at the minimum, and it is called a legal tender note as well. There will be some switches in that as we go along also. And then in terms of some notes about this specific bill, this was often called a rainbow note, and that's also why it's a bit more expensive, because there was just a lot of color, as you can see, between the shades of green and the red. 1874, we see a similar design, but as you can see, there's changes. It's not as green, and this design would be continued in terms of the obverse in some respects through to the 1920s. Value on this is $100 minimum, $750 at the general upper range. Next up, we see a very similar one, just some minor switches. 1880, similar value, $150 to $750, and the notes on this one, there are some blue serial number varieties, and those are going to be worth about 4 times as much as a red serial number. The serial number, of course, is what you see as the identifier of what number bill it was made as. Moving on, we have what I believe is the first woman on a currency note in the United States. 1886, the Martha Washington note, valued at between $100 and $750. It's also the first silver certificate made, and basically they could be redeemed for $1 in silver coinage, so that kind of maybe cleared some issues up for those who didn't really trust the paper currency, because paper is very different from having a silver or a gold, some type of metal backing the currency. Now we don't have anything backing the currency, but back then that was kind of important, so these could be exchanged for $1 in silver coin. Now as we move along, we see 1890, we have Edwin Stanton appear. This is actually a more valuable note, $300 to $3,000, and this is a treasury note or a coin note, and it's the first ever treasury note made, and Edwin Stanton was the Secretary of War, I believe, during the Civil War, so that could be why he is pictured here. Also interesting of note, the $1 in coin, back then, most of these coins would have been silver as well. And as we keep going, in 1891, they also made it not too different, just the back is really significant, and the type is a treasury note, but it's also the last year treasury notes were made, so they didn't really stick around for too long. With that being said, though, we get a big switch and we go to the educational note. So it's George and Marcia Washington are on the back. And in terms of the design on the obverse, it is a woman, probably emblematic of liberty, right here, pointing to the Washington Monument. And it is a bill that's worth about $100 at the minimum and can really range up, but the educational notes were pretty significant in that they were designed to educate people. So there were famous names printed, as you can see in these wreaths here, and there was just a lot of history and artistic development kind of encapsulated in these notes. They're, again, highly unique, very dissimilar, I should say, from most other currency we've made in the States. In 1899, we switch to what are called Black Eagle notes. These are featuring a black eagle prominently. They also have Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses Grant. The value kind of starts to dip from this point on, though there are a couple exceptions, but this is probably $40 to $750. Year 1899, and it is a silver certificate. When I say look out for star notes, I know that these ones, so sometimes they would make an error and they'd have to use some replacement notes. They'd be denoted with a star, and on this series they can be a lot more valuable, but it's always a good idea to look out for some cool star notes. They still are made today. The next one, though, is 1917, and here's what I was saying before when I said that the design would carry over for a long time. These are not silver certificates. They're legal tender notes, but the value ranges between $20 and $200. They have George Washington on them, and they're often called a sawhorse note. The next one we call Flying Eagle notes because of the back, but there were tons of different varieties of these made. They're 1918 George Washington $1 bills. They're called Federal Reserve Banknotes, FRBNs, and the value is $20 to $300. But the different Federal Reserve banks could make them, so they weren't all San Francisco. I'm sure that there were ones like Philadelphia or New York, but I actually haven't seen them, so I can't say that with 100% certainty, but this is some cool national currency. And in terms of the 1923 $1 bill, here we have George Washington as always. The value on this is going to be $20 to $100. Similarly, it's going to be a silver certificate, and it's the last large size silver certificate. It's often referred to as a horse blanket because the note was simply so large. Other notes have been referred to horse blankets, but it will significantly decrease in size as we move to our next one, which is going to be in the 1928 range, though there was a more valuable non-silver certificate. So the type was a legal tender United States note, and that was one of the last large-size legal tender notes. And again, $75 to $500 or more dollars is a big difference. The main differentiator being that one of them was a silver certificate, the other was a legal tender note. Moving on, we have some small-size silver certificates. These are the first one. The 1928 was called a funny back because the back is just kind of interesting and a lot different from what we have today. Was a silver certificate, and the value, again, starts to decrease about $7.50 to $50. And then as we continue to move, we have first off, though, a legal tender one that's a lot more valuable, $75 to $400, with that red seal instead of the blue silver certificate one, and that was going to be the last $1 red seal. But then we get a 1934, which is even a little bit less valuable, very similar to before, also a funny back. $5 to $40 is the range here. Then we get what are a lot more common in 1935. $1 bill does not have a funny back, very similar to what we see today, and the value is probably $1.50 to $25. Though you should look for Hawaii's and North Africa's, and I'll get to those in a second. So first is a North African here, also 1935, but the value is a lot more, $20 to $125. And basically, they were made for forces in Europe and North Africa who were fighting during World War II. But the thing is, if they would get captured, then all of the North African currency would be rendered valueless, basically. So they had a good measure of insurance in case they got overtaken. They'd just cancel this currency. But now it's rare and worth a lot more than the regular. Similarly, they had the same thing going on in Hawaii. In case Hawaii was captured by Japan, they could say everything that had the Hawaii on it was now valueless. So that would prevent Hawaii being financially, if Japan took it, they couldn't get all of the U.S. currency and start using that. These are also valued between $20 and $100. Finally, in 1957, they had the last series year for silver certificates. Again, they're only $1.50 to $10 or so, but they're still fun. And then today is the 1963 and on note. It features George Washington. It's about $1, though there are some special things that potentially make it more valuable, like bar notes, web notes, star notes, birthday notes, and there's a lot more out there, but there's some cool serial numbers that will make them worth more occasionally, but they're always fun to search for. I actually search for them a lot on some other videos of mine, but I hope that you enjoyed. There's really a ton of history located within these $1 bills, and the different designs are really cool to see the evolution of. So that being said, I hope that you enjoyed the video and that you got a lot out of it. Thanks for watching the video. I'd encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe to help me out with my channel. And if you want to connect more, I do so on my Facebook, Treasure Town, my website, treasuretownYT.com, or my Instagram, TreasureTownYT. Have a great day, and I hope to see you on some of my other videos.